Welcome to the first national webinar organized by Bhattacharyas and Associates. Before we start, just a humble request to all of you, all over again, kindly mute your microphone unless you are posing a question during the questionnaire session. In this virtual world, noise and net connection both can give us hard time. And during this lockdown, we all have faced this. They make us very vulnerable. So could you please do that? Mute your microphone just to avoid unnecessary noise interference and nothing else. And please try to keep your video on as we don't want to miss out the excitement on your face as I said earlier. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we shall begin our webinar in this auspicious moment, expecting all of you to bear with us and our net connection in case it fails. I welcome you all again to this national webinar conducted by Bhattacharyas and Associates, advocates and consultants. Thank you for taking the trouble and gracing our effort with your presence this evening, sir. As regards us, we are a law firm based in Kolkata, working all over India on a variety of issues, especially in taxation matters. Without making you wait further, we extend a special welcome to our guest of honor, eminent legal personality, Honorable Justice Pradipta Rai. Honorable Justice Rai elevated from the bar to the bench in December 1994 at Calcutta High Court. Thereafter, he was transferred to Orissa High Court in January 1995, then again came back to Calcutta High Court in January 2003 and retired in 2004. In February 2006, he was appointed as chairman of the West Bengal Taxation Tribunal and retired in April 2010. Besides that, he had also headed various committees like Fee Structure Committee for Private Self-Financing, Engineering and Professional Institution, Academic Advisory Committee, erstwhile United Bank of India Settlement Advisory Committee, and external judicial member of the Settlement Committee of erstwhile Allahabad Bank, all in the capacity of chairman. I must say, sir, quite a beautiful journey. I would now request the senior most co-founder and managing partner of our firm, Mr. Sugata Bhattacharya, to say a few words.
Respected Honorable Justice Pradipta Roy and all other respected participants who have shown keen interest to attend this webinar. We are very happy to announce that quite a good number of participants have joined this webinar today. We could not accommodate more persons for obvious reasons. We feel highly inspired and intend to organize similar webinars in future. As already stated, the topic for discussion today is origin of taxation, Indian context. I request the Honorable Justice Pradipta Roy, our guest of honor today, to formally declare the discussion session open and deliver his keynote address. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Sugata Bhattacharya and the other members of the organizers. Good afternoon, everybody, particularly the learned audience attending this webinar. This webinar is being organized by Bhattacharya and Associates, a legal firm which has already earned reputation and confidence of the litigants for its quality of service, professional competence, sincerity, and dedication. Set up on 5th November 2014, they are at present having active matters in several high courts and tribunals in different states of India. Legal profession is highly competitive and it is very difficult to grow and sustain unless one is able to satisfy the multifarious needs of the litigants. Success of this legal firm within a span of about 6 years deserves praise and appreciation. Today's speaker is Sri Bodhayan Bhattacharya, who is one of the co-founders of this legal firm, Bhattacharya and Associates. He is an enthusiastic young man with an intensive academic interest in various branches and aspects of law, and particularly that of taxation. After obtaining his LLB degree, he proceeded to study further and completed postgraduate degree of LLM from Symbiosis International University, Pune, in international business and commercial law. He is not only the co-founder but also it's the leading counsel of this firm, driving force. His enthusiasm, determination, dedication and knowledge of the subject have brought Bhattacharya and Associates to its present height. Subject chosen by him for today's webinar may not be very useful from professional point of view, but it is quite interesting and it has immense academic value. He will speak on origin of taxation, Indian context. I understand that the speaker will trace the origin and development of the concept of taxation, its features from the days of the Manusmriti up to pre-Sultanate period. I am certain that it will be an illuminating and informative talk. We are all aware that at the present time, two basic principles govern the realm of taxation, namely, no tax can be levied without authority of law, and no tax can be realized unless authorized by valid law. These principles were most probably first embodied in writing in 1215 in the historical document of Magna Carta in England. This was subsequently confirmed in the Bill of Rights 1689, which declared levying money for the use of the crown by pretense of prerogative without grant of parliament is illegal. These basic principles have been incorporated in Article 265 of the Constitution of India, which prohibits levy and collection of tax except by authority of law. Originally, the draft prepared by the Constituent Assembly did not have any Article 265. However, drafting committee constituted by the Constituent Assembly proposed required changes. Dr. Ambedkar, in his speech while introducing this amendment, stated, quote, the first change that has been made is that there shall be no taxation without law. If any levy is to be made upon the people, the sanction must be that of law. The period proposed to be covered by the learned speaker is mostly a period of monarchies. The monarchies, we are all aware, they were at least claiming to enjoy a kind of divine right, and there are on many occasions their comments were the law. When F.W. Maitland in his Constitutional History of England has noted that even during the period of Magna Carta and sometime thereafter, the quote, no distinction was drawn between national revenue and royal revenue. The king's revenue was king's revenue no matter the source whence it came. It was his to spend or to save as pleased him best. All was his pocket money. That we must look for any machinery for compelling the king to spend his money on national objects. We are eager to learn from the learned speaker whether the situation in ancient India was similar to that of England and whether the present day governing principles of taxation were operative in the said era in some form or other, or taxation was a part of prerogative of the monarchs. We also do not know whether there was any separate legislative body like the parliament, which was in at least functioning in some form in England from the Middle Ages, other than the king, and whether the king's commands were regarded as law. I do not wish to consume any further time. Everybody is eager to listen to the speaker on this very interesting subject. I express my gratitude to the organizers for offering me the privilege of being the guest of honor in this webinar. Jai Hind. Now I invite the speaker to deliver talks. Thank you.
This is the advantage of having everyone in the family, you know. The moderator, the coordinator, the speaker. Sorry. Again, the net connection issue. Thank you. Thanks a lot for bearing with us. Sir, we are grateful to you for your kind speech, which has greatly enlightened and enriched us. It was such an audio delight. I would like to present this small token of love and respect on behalf of Bhattacharyas and Associates. This, I know, sir, this small memento is nothing compared to what you have contributed today, but we will be highly obliged if you accept this. We will also send you some tokens of love and honor at your place along with this memento.
I am glad to accept it.
Thank you so much. We will definitely get them delivered to you shortly, sir. I know, my lordship, again, this is nothing compared to what you have contributed today, but this is just our way of showing respect and love. Without further ado, I now request Ms. Sritopa Sinha, Associated Advocate of this firm, to introduce our speaker, Mr. Bodhayan Bhattacharya, the co-founder and managing partner of Bhattacharyas and Associates. After the deliberation, there will be an open house questionnaire session on this topic. Till then, as requested earlier, kindly mute your microphone and keep your videos on. Thank you so much. Ms. Sinha, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege for me to address you in this august occasion. Today, our speaker is Mr. Bodhayan Bhattacharya, advocate, co-founder and managing partner of Bhattacharyas Associates. And Mr. Bhattacharya obtained his law degree from the Symbiosis International University of Pune and later obtained LLM. He has been practicing regularly in various high courts like Calcutta, Delhi, Bombay, Gujarat, Orissa, Guwahati and Sikkim High Court, various tribunals and taxation service matters. We are proud to have you, sir, in our organization. Mr. Bhattacharya, please.
यथा फलेन उज्जते राजा कर्ता च कर्मणाम तथा वेक्षा नृपो राष्ट्रे कल्पयत सतंत करान. With my deepest humility and respect to today's chair and today's distinguished delegates, I start the deliverance on my part. Just now, what I had said, unfortunately, I know many of us, including me myself, because previously Sanskrit was used to be taught in schools, so it would have been easily understandable and understood to everybody. But now today I know it won't be understandable, so I endeavor myself to get it admitted, for that matter of fact. Am I audible, by the way? Am I audible? Yes? Fine. Thank you. Thank you. So now, yatha falena ujjate raja karta cha karmanam tatha veksha nripo rashtre kalpayat satant karan. This was perhaps the most primitive, the most, but I say the word primitive, but most advanced reference to the realm of taxation. We get this from Manusmriti. This is the 128th shloka of chapter 7 of Manusmriti, which talks about Rajadharma. Now, what does it mean? It says, whenever a king, he imposes tax, he must impose tax in order to garner revenue. True. But whenever he imposes taxes, he must look at, he must have a consideration for the profits of the subjects, of the traders, of the taxpayers, of the people, of the farmers, of the Varna Vishesha, meaning with all of them. Like, it's not Brahmin, not Kshatriya, not Vaishya, not Shudra. It's for all and sundry. One has to take into account their means of taxation and their means of earnings. Now, that was the basic foundation. I know in case of a webinar, in case of a seminar, what you have, you can see the speaker, at least a person moves in front of you. But in the webinars, things become very, it becomes drab. After a few time, people will become just bored. So what I have done, I will give you a small presentation. I will come up with a small presentation. Just tell me if you are facing any issue with this presentation. If you can have my presentation, I mean, can you see on the screen, I guess? Yes, that's good. That's good. Okay. Let me start. So this was the concept of, I will first go into the primary lawgivers. Who were the primary lawgivers of the country? In ancient India, the first laws came from Manusmriti. The Manusmriti can be dated from 200 BCE till 200 CE, meaning before Christ 200, after Christ 200. So it's a span of 400 years. These Smriti was collected. This was taken up as a complete code. Then from Manusmriti, very ably, it was picked up by Chanakya, who wrote Arthashastra. Then you have Kamandaka. Kamandaka, in this session, I won't be able to cover. Then you have Sukracharya Usana. Now, Sukracharya Usana is regarded to be the oldest of the treatises. But why I make it number 4? Because the actual treaty of Sukracharya Usana, you might be knowing, those of you who are familiar with the Puranas and the mythological stories of India, that Sukracharya was the guru of the Asuras, of the demons. He was the guru of the demons. So this was Sukraniti Sara, which is even referred to in Manusmriti, but unfortunately we have lost the actual Sukraniti Sara text, the parchment that they used to write, that was lost. Let me remind you, 200 BC parchments of Manusmriti was found. So it is as real as you and me. Manusmriti is nothing. It's not a imaginary figment of imagination. No, it's something that is very much real. That is something very much as real as you and me. So now, Sukraniti Sara was later on compiled by various scholars. These scholars, they compiled it between 300 CE to 700 CE. So that basically dates it after Kamandaka. So we have first Manu, then Chanakya, then Kamandaka, then we have Sukraniti. And if we go into the works, then it's the Manusmriti, the Arthashastra, Kamandaka Niti Sara, Sukraniti Sara. Now, the fundamental principle of taxation in entire ancient India, I must say, that was this principle with which I opened the sermon today. Yatha falena ujjate raja karta cha karmanam tatha viksha nripo rashtre kalpayat satant karan. A king should be mindful of the profits of traders before imposing his taxes. That was the teachings of our Manusmriti. Now, thereafter, we can very ably go into the next slok, which will be again another pivot or another founding pillar of the jurisprudence of Indian taxation. Anything Indian is very benevolent, we have seen. We were not a very warring sort of people. We were not very belligerent people. So we were very peace-loving, prosperity-loving people, contained in ourselves and having code to develop ourselves. Now I come to the second one of the fundamental principles of ancient Manusmriti. I won't bother you with the Sanskrit thing, but I'm just giving you the excerpt. That slok says, a king should exact taxes from his subjects in such minimal quantity as that taken by a leech from its host, or a bumblebee from the flower, or by a calf from the cow. Now kindly understand, why bumblebee? Why not a bee? Why a leech? Why a calf? Because if the leech feeds on the host is not killed, neither is it harmed. When the bumblebee takes nectar from the flower, it leaves majority of the nectar behind. Similarly, the calf, when it feeds itself from the mother, it leaves some milk in the cow. So you should not take away everything. That was the if I may be allowed to say, antarnihita artha. That was the main crux of the matter, which said that you should not take away everything. Because if you take away everything, if the king takes away everything, then the economy famishes. If the economy famishes, trade famishes. Trade famishes, economy famishes, then people famishes. If the people famish, then the kingdom famishes. If the kingdom famishes, anarchy prevails. Once again, the king, the people, everything is gone. Everybody gets famished. Now, there is a second part to this shloka, or rather, a meaning which goes beyond the text, which is subtler than the text itself. Kindly look, they are talking about exaction of tax by minimal quantity. The primary focus is on exaction of tax on minimal quantity. But what about the need? Kindly see, it's not a need of a lion. It's a need of a leech. A lion kills, a leech doesn't. It's a need of a bumblebee. It's not a need of a tiger. A tiger kills, a bumblebee doesn't. Kindly see, it's a need of a calf, that of a baby from a mother. Anything else, it kills, but these do not. So Manu actually wanted the the kings and the kingships to learn to contain their needs. If your need is much more, you will never be satisfied or satiated. So your need should be the need of a leech, but not of a lion, not of a tiger. So that was as far as this fundamental principles of taxation is concerned. Same principle is reiterated in the Sukraniti Sara. In Sukraniti Sara, there is another very beautiful example. It says, as the gardener collects flowers and fruits after duly nourishing the trees with care, the collector of taxes is to collect the taxes in the like ways. Meaning, now just get into the kindly let us delve into the depth of the philosophy. If I say today that the example of gardener and flowers and fruits, these are basically symbiotic relationship. Why I say this? Because if the garden is not tended, then the trees die. If the gardener is not tended, then the gardener dies. Now, if the gardener gets food like that of fruits and other forest products, he sustains with the fruits, and the forest sustains with the care of the gardener, or the garden sustains with the care of the gardener. So these were the golden words on which, on banking on which the Indian taxation system was formed. This was the beauty of Sukraniti Sara, this was the beauty of Manusmriti, and this was the beauty of the examples that we are recently been talking about. Now, let's come back once again. Now, if today we looked at our own society, what do we get to see? We get to see everybody is saying, let us make sustainable development. I know there are students amongst us. You will be more conversant with the environmental law than me, because I had done it before an era, and probably nowadays even the facets and the faces of environmental law has changed a lot. But whatever I remember from the tenets and precepts of environmental law, you will see scores of cases on MC Mehta versus Union of India, MC Mehta versus Union of India. Each MC Mehta had something different to say. Now, similarly, as in MC Mehta versus Union of India, as in sustainable development, the goal has always been, let me quote from Mahavira, to live and let live. The goal has been to live peaceably, sustainably with everybody. Fold everybody, take into your fold everybody. That was the goal. Now, that goes the incidence of taxation. Now, I will come to another very significant part. I have to jump because the time is limited. So, I will come to a very significant question that is prevailing in the present days. Have you ever seen the tax structure of a nation which is already developed? Let us say about United States of America, or let us talk about United Kingdom. They also have a tax structure. What are the rates out there? 2%, 1.5%, 3%. At maximum, it is 3.5%, not more than that. So if that is the rate out there, why our nation is having a tax rate of 20%, 25%? At times, if you add the cascading effect of taxation, then you have a rate nearly equivalent to 40 to 43%. That is what, once again, our forefathers like Manu, Sukracharya, then Kautilya, especially Kautilya, I must say, that's Chanakya, they had always said that lesser the tax burden, better is the state. Even today, we always see now today, nowadays, in the present day ruling government, there is a tagline: minimum governance. Now, what is minimum governance? Minimum exaction, minimum red tape, minimum bureaucracy, and you have maximum governance. Minimum government, maximum governance. Or rather, we should have maximum governance and minimum governance. So that is what we aim to achieve. That is what they had also aimed to achieve. And nowadays, see, whenever we look at the nations, we look at the first world countries, we see that minimum governance and rather minimum rate of tax and maximum social benefit has already been achieved. It's very important to note, even in those days, the highest rate of taxation, like in that pre-Vedic or the Vedic period, it was a late Vedic period till 1100 AD, right from, you can say, 2500 BC to 1100 AD, till the Gupta age, till the end of Gupta age, the taxation, the concept of taxation, the rate of taxation never went beyond 20%. There was, at one point of time, there was an argument between two of the Nitisara Pandits. One said, you should not tax those parts of the country which are not having a good produce, a good crop, a good a climate to produce crop, or which do not have that amount of sustainability in itself, or where the impoverished people live. Chanakya said, yes, you should not do that. You should not tax them in regular rates, but you should tax those people who are having a good cultivation, good fertile land, good crop. You should tax those people so as to mitigate the quantity of tax which is lost there. And one must have, nowadays we say, you see, but there are taxes whenever there is a war. This was also a concept from the ancient Indian treatises. Manusmriti expressly provided, Kautilya's Arthashastra expressly provided, Kamandaka's Niti is expressly provided that there will be a taxation for war. Now the question is why? You will say, the country is already war torn. How can people pay taxes? But there was also a corollary to it. At those juncture, in those days, there were loots from the war. Nowadays, there is no loot from the war. There is no war booty. The concept war booty is no more. There were loots from the war. There were homages paid to the king. Chanakya said, if you are taking that taxes on war, then you must also distribute the homage that you receive. It was not a one-way traffic. It was a both-way traffic. Then, any sort of taxation is incomplete without two very necessary things. I will once again come to the presentation. Kindly have a look at your screen. I guess it's, yes. Moderator, is it coming on the screen? Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Now, kindly come up to this. Rates of tax. Rates of tax had always, as I said, slab of taxation was different for different social standings. There were rate differences. There were classification differences. And those Pandits of law or of social science, as it was known in those days, they were very much accustomed, or they were very much aware of the need of classification of various goods. Today, suppose we all have bread, even I have bread, even Dhirubhai Ambani has bread, Ariksha Pular has bread. We all need bread. Now, if somebody today taxes bread, say at 40%, there will be an uproar. Now again, a person who is buying a luxury car, a rickshawala does not need a luxury car. I do not need a luxury car as of now, but tomorrow I feed myself fat and I need a luxury car. Tomorrow will have a luxury car. Now the question is, if a person is buying a luxury car, then he has the means to pay the tax. Obviously, the tax rate on an essential commodity like bread will not be equivalent to the tax rate on the luxury car. Similarly, classification of goods were made and taxes were imposed on respective commodity. That is the second point in the slide that you are watching on your screen. What I have not written here and what I want to introduce here, they had even a concept of customs. Friendly nations, unfriendly nations. If you are my friendly nation, if some goods I have to take in from the friendly nation in my territory, I will charge a lesser amount of customs, or I will not charge them at all. On the contrary, what we used to do, they had reciprocal agreements that even our goods, when sold in their market, will not attract any extra charges. Now, my friends, legal laureates, could you actually find the most important aspect of the matter? Could you really appreciate the most important aspect of the matter? We are talking about taxation agreements between countries. We are talking about reciprocal taxation agreements. We are talking about double tax avoidance agreements, DTAs. When 200 years before the birth of Christ, 200 years before the birth of Christ, we are talking about trade negotiations from the countries, or rather the states which are not mine, and we had DTAs, double taxation avoidance system. We had customs and excise laws in place, and most peculiarly, we even had a full office set up, full Nagarpalika systems, where a collector was identified, where a receiver was identified. There was a tax system of recovery, kotwals. They were known as kotwals. We have heard the term kotwals. So those kotwals were appointed. Anyway, so this is all on the rate of taxes. Now comes the most important part. After this part, I will go into the questionnaire session. I will be continuing on my blabbering as usual. You just do one thing. At the adjacent side of your screen, you can see a chat box. Kindly use that chat box. Just write it down that I have a question. The moment you write down I have a question, and the moment I see it, and the moment I can pause myself from my blabbering, I will ask you to put the question through. Kindly do unmute yourself and put the question through. But before that, I will go on with the final aspect, which is the most important aspect, perhaps. In my opinion, it's the most important aspect of the taxation treaties that we are following. That is the part of exemption. This is not only the most interesting aspect, but this is also perhaps the most argumentative aspect. Why I say argumentative aspect? Because if you see, very well, I'll come to it once it falls through. I'll come to it. Yes, I have covered Manusmriti. I have covered this Kautilya. Yes, now, okay. First and foremost, I will once again go back to my presentation. Yeah. Just a moment. Give me kindly a moment. My window has closed. I'm not very habituated with these webinars. It's a different ball game in a seminar, but I'm sorry to say I'm not very habituated. Yeah. Yes, now I will start presenting. Yes. Arthashastra classified revenue. Amar asche? Arthashastra classified revenue on these lines. Firstly, Mula, the capital. Bhaga, share of crops, etc., directly payable to the crown. But I will explain you what actually it was. There were certain lands which were earmarked as king's land. Why king's land? King will eat the rice that is yielded by a whole paddy field. Of course, no. King's land is for the king's treasury, where the crops will be put in a storage. Dairy products will be put in a storage. Food will be made and put in a storage. Why? If there is a famish, it will be opened for all and sundry. That is why it's the king's land. That's the function of a king's land. Now, king's bhaga is the share of the crops that the king's land directly took it to themselves, and they, by way of some, nowadays we say perks, as some perks to the farmers and the cultivators and the dairy people, they used to pay them a part of it. That was in addition to their remuneration. Then Vyaji, interest. We all know interest, what it is. Vyaji, we all know. Vyaji is something that today, if I'm a tax defaulter, tomorrow I have to pay the tax, not only the tax, along with the interest. So that concept has come up from there. That's the Vyaji. Kara. Now, Kara is, in general, any tax of, any sort of tax is a Kara, but in most of the cases, Kara is known as the tax on movable goods. This is unofficially, I'm telling you, because whatever I have read, I thought it so. Kliptra and Pindakaras. Pindakara and Kliptra, these are fixed taxes. What are fixed taxes? For example, somebody is living just beside the king's field. He can get the produce from the depot just outside his door. He doesn't need to travel to the market, hiring a bullock cart. So that is some benefit that he is getting. So for that, there was a fixed tax on that particular area. That was a fixed tax, Kliptra, Pindakara. Depending on the land, the name changed. Shulka we all know, that's tolls. Like you can see, there were tolls, so they maintained their roads, they maintained their streets, there were tolls. Atyaya, fines. Ati Yukto Aya. Ati Yukto Aya is Atyaya. Atyaya or Atyaya. Atyaya is fines. Means it's something extra on your eye. That's something extra on your income. Rupika, this is very important. Not only important, this is very interesting, I guess. At those points of time, government did not, the kings, they did not have mints for manufacturing coins. So what they did, they licensed a few makers of coins, goldsmiths, coppersmiths. They used to license them. For example, if somebody nowadays, see, if I look, I need money, I will go to the market and I'll buy something. I need money, I don't have money at that point of time. So what do? I take a bag of grains, I take a bag of barley in my bag, I get to the nearest coin maker, I give him that barley bag, he takes out some copper from his store which is equivalent to that bag of barley, and now he makes it, he prepares the coin for me, and on that the remuneration he gets or charges, on that there was a tax called Rupika. That is the premium charged by the government. Now I am going to the market, I have given that copper coin to some shopkeeper. Copper coin he is preserving, or he is also spending somewhere. Say after 10 years, that copper coin gets damaged. You must have seen ancient Indian coins in damaged conditions. Those gets damaged. Now, the Arthashastra said that you can use a damaged coin to a particular extent, not more than that. Why? Because if your coin is to contain 10 grams of silver, then you will get something against that 10 grams of silver. If your coin is broken, if it contains 7 grams of silver, then there's a loss of revenue. So you had to, from time to time, you have to give all your coins to the to another government licensed official, to whom he will just look into those coins and see that whether they are in a good condition or not, whether they are in marketable condition or not. That is known as parigha. These were collectively known as the ayamukha. Now, here comes the most important thing. This is the only slide where I have managed to make an animation. Others I have conveniently let it go. I'll just have a gulp of water and continue. The first concept is service in lieu of tax. Very important. Indigenous people who could not pay taxes, but they can, they're good craftsmiths, they're good cultivators. What the Arthashastra said and what the Manusmriti said, this is the first, this concept first I saw it in Manusmriti. Service in lieu of taxes. Unfortunately, this no longer exists in India. Why it no longer exists in India, I do not know, but it should have been there. This is where somewhere you go to a person who cannot pay his taxes, but he is otherwise a very gifted laborer of any sort. The king says, the Manusmriti says, work for a full complete day in any public utility, in any public employment, without wages, for in 1 month give me 1 day of your labor and your taxes are wiped off, your liabilities are wiped off. This is a fantastic concept. I do not know why it's not there. Now the second, I'll elucidate it a bit more, but before that I will just go on, run through the three points of exemption. Third one is exemption for the knowledgeables. Probably this is the one which attracts most criticism. It is the most misunderstood provision in the present day India. This is the provision with which the most hues and cries are made. Kindly see on the screen I have written Stotro Gyanim, exemption for the knowledgeables. See, I'll be very frank with you. I'm not a Pandit, I'm not a master in Sanskrit. But whatever little bit of knowledge in Sanskrit I have, and whatever little bit of Manu and Arthashastra, whatever little bit I have read, they will say, I mean, in most of the cases I have seen that people say there was this provision was for the Brahmins, but this was not for the Brahmins. I'll tell you why and how. Now on to the third point, remission of taxes. This is revolutionary. Remission of taxes to encourage industry. My goodness, nowadays we do it. What do? Okay, you take MSMEs, you take loan from the government. It's an interest-free loan. Not interest-free, it's a loan which you are supposed to pay after, say, 5 years, 10 years, 2 years. Under the West Bengal Sales Tax Act, I will give an example just at home. The concept was for remission if you are a newly set up. Kindly mute your microphone.
Dr. S. Shah, kindly mute your microphone. Dr. S. Shah, yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. So now on the question of remission under the West Bengal Sales Tax Act 1994, that is the most near to home reference that I can think of. The provision is if you are a newly set up industrial unit, just a moment, yeah. If you're a newly set up industrial unit, you do not need to pay taxes. Why? Because you are a newly set up industrial unit. For 5 years, 2 years, you get an eligibility certificate of eligibility you get, you show it to the government, see, there is a tax holiday, I do not need to pay my taxes for 2 years or 3 years. That was it. So this concept was prevalent even at that point of time. I'll come back to all of this. First, I will give a bit elaborate description on the service in lieu of tax. This was propounded by Manu and perfected in Arthashastra. What Arthashastra said, under Arthashastra it was known as Kara Pratikara. Kara Pratikara, mane who could not pay their taxes, it's a pratikar for them, it's a Kara Pratikara. What this Arthashastra said? Arthashastra said, very well, you cannot give me the tax. Maybe a region, it's a hilly region. Maybe there the crops are not so abundant. The crops are not so abundant. It's a hilly region. You cannot give me taxes. Very well. What you have in the hilly region, people in arid regions, hilly regions, where there is no taxes, where the life is difficult, people are stout built. People have a good physique. They can go on against the adversarial forces of nature. They have been trained to go on against the adversarial force of nature. So, Kautilya said, contribute in the army. Go and join the army. If you join the army, your whole family is tax-free. Obviously, in addition to the remunerations that you get in the army, whatever rations that you get in the army, in addition to all this, kindly understand one thing. Villages after villages, they were known as Ayodhya. Ayodhya, the warring villages. They contributed to the magnanimous army of Chandragupta Maurya. He had the largest standing army at that point of time in history all over the world. Nobody could match them. Romans talked of their legions. Legions is 5,000. And Chandragupta Maurya talks of Akhauhini. Akhauhini is, you can Google it out. Akhauhini is a setup where one Akhauhini is equivalent to, it's an IBG, integrated battle group. You have chariots, you have elephants, you have infantries, you have cavalries, and one such group entails at least 1.3 lakh of soldiers. And they used to have 100 Akhauhinis of forces. Anyway, so that's how they built their Ayodhya. Then they had, you have a village where the supply of cattle is good, grains is good, but the market is far away. People cannot pay you cash. What do? You pay in cash. You do not pay in cash. You pay in grains. You pay in dairy products. You pay in gold, known as Hiranya. Then there were villages who supplied raw materials, known as Krupa. You had villages who supplied, who did not specialize in anything, unfortunately. But people were not well off to give the taxes, pay the taxes. They constituted the Bhisti. They supplied labor. They supplied labor in lieu of tax. This was Bhisti. All public works, road construction, temple construction, university construction, Bhistis were used. This was again all in lieu of tax. This is all for another thing. Yes. Now I come to the second, the most controversial part, that I said that the knowledgeables, I use the term knowledgeables, but unfortunately, even in the book that I studied, I will show you the books. This is the book. Even in the book that I studied for Manusmriti, very unfortunate. Even in that book, the heading reads, the Brahmanas have to be protected. The Brahmins were exempted from taxes. Unfortunate. With all my humility, I beg to differ with the author. It was not the Brahmins. The stotrias, the Sanskrit verses never used the term Brahman at all. Always it used Stotra Gyani. And the words Stotra Gyani have been even defined under Manusmriti, under Kautilya's Arthashastra. Who is a Stotra Gyani? A person who can converse, who can recite 4 Vedas and all the 13 Upanishads. He is a Stotragyani. Come on, I being Bodhan Bhattacharya, a Brahmin by birth, I am not a Brahmin in that sense. I cannot recite 4 Vedas, I cannot recite 13 Upanishads. What they meant was this: you should protect the knowledgeables. What Manu said, there is a slok where it says, if the author writes, if the Brahman dies of hunger, the whole state will be devastated in his hunger. Sorry, sir, it's not the Brahman. It's where the knowledgeables die of hunger, then poverty is going to be the garb of the nation. Obviously, if today, in my opinion, Sir Oppenheimer, who actually discovered the nuclear weapon, when he blasted the nuclear weapon under the Atlantic Sea, Pacific Sea, he was reciting from Gita, Thousand Splendid Suns. He was a Brahman. He was a Stotragyani. APJ Abdul Kalam was a Stotragyani. Yes, he was. It is not on religion. It is obviously not on birth. It is not on caste. It is what we do. So similarly here also, when we are saying if the knowledgeable dies, just take an example, round up all the knowledgeable people, all the intelligent people, round them up in one single room, gas them to death. Tomorrow, everybody will be a savage. All the quantum of gyan, all the quantum of knowledge is gone.
स्वगृहे पूज्यते पितरा स्वग्रामे पूज्यते प्रभु स्वदेशे
पूज्यते राजा विद्वान सर्वत्र पूज्यते. Why? A person who is knowledgeable has to be worshipped everywhere. Swagrihe pujyate pitara. In his own house, the father is worshipped. Swagrame pujyate prabhu. In his village, the headman is worshipped. Swadeshe pujyate raja. In his country, the raja is being worshipped. Vidwan sarvatro pujyate. That is the essence. A knowledgeable person, a vidwan, a vid, a Stotragyani is always respected throughout and worshipped. And that is what Manusmriti said. I won't go into the caste thing of the Manusmriti because that may be discussed another day. That's not taxation. But I must tell you something. Even for the caste system that they say that Manu devised caste system, it's all trash. No, Manu did not devise caste system. Manu only said that if you have learned caste, if you have learned a trade, follow it. Rest is Brahmanical religion, all mugging things up. Anyway, let that be a story for another day. Anyway, now that was the piece of Acha. One very important aspect I must say, that is Kautilya perfected this. What he did? Look, Manu was a very subtle sort of, Manusmriti is a very subtle sort of a thing. The texts have intertexts. You can go into it, aram se, and then you can interpret it. There is much in Manusmriti. But Kautilya is very authoritative, very straightforward. He says what he wants. He doesn't go hanky-panky about that. If Kautilya Chanakya wants something, you do that. That is what Chanakya is. Chanakya says, he defines Brahmadaya. What is Brahmadaya? Those lands given to the Brahmins. Again, not Brahmins, to the Stotragyanis. Those land given to the Stotragyanis, Brahmadaya. Kautilya says all Brahmadayas there should be a few rules on those Brahmadayas. Today I am getting a Brahmadaya. Very good. My son may be just a goner, just a loser. He might not be as knowledgeable as me. He might get rot, whatever. So if he gets my Brahmadaya, you will be actually benefiting somebody who's not deserving. So Brahmadaya could be transferred only to another person who is holding a Brahmadaya. If today Mr. Anshul Narayan is holding a Brahmadaya, he can transfer the Brahmadaya to Honorable Justice Pradipta Rai if he is holding a Brahmadaya. Obviously, they are holding Brahmadayas, they can exchange, they can transfer through each other. That is how Brahmadaya should be given. Thirdly, for example, but don't take me otherwise, only the faces I am seeing on the screen, I am taking it up. No partiality out here. Like Shorodipto. If today Shorodipto gets a Brahmadaya and he fails to transfer it to anybody, there came the concept of Eka Purusha Kani. Today, Mr. Yadev Sharma is holding a Brahmodaya. After his demise, what will happen to that Brahmodaya? Then comes the concept of Eka Purusha Kani. What is Eka Purusha Kani? Limited estate. Limited estate for life. So if somebody is given Brahmodaya, it is Eka Purusha Kani. Eka Purusha Kani Brahmodaya. That means he will be getting and enjoying it throughout his life. Once he dies without transferring it, it will devolve back to the crown. It will be taken up by the crown once again. I get goosebumps. I get goosebumps discussing this, and once again in such an before an August audience, I get goosebumps. Just imagine the thinking level, the level of the revelations. Just imagine what they could think and how clearly they could see at those ages. Our visions are fogged right now. Our visions are completely fogged right now. I will take another small example. Why? How the tax will be mitigated? How will it be mitigated within the people? How it will be distributed before the people, or what the king needs to do? We all say Ram, Raghuvansha, the Ram Rajatya. Kalidas actually described Ram Rajatya in his Raghuvansham. It's a beauty. It's a beauty. I'll tell you. I'm tempted to once again cite that slok of the original Kalidasa. Then I will explain. It says, Prajanameva bhutyartha satabhyo balimagrahit sahasra gunam usrishtuma dattehi rasam ravi. Prajanameva bhutyartha, meaning for the praja. Prajanameva bhutyartha. Bhutyartha means for the benefits of the praja. Satabhyo, from them. Balimagrahit. Balim means a type of taxation. It may be religious. Here it is used as a general tax. Balimagrahit means the king is taking the balim. The king is taking the tax from the people of this his own subjects. He's taking the tax up. Why? Just for their own subsistence. And what he does? Sahasra gunam usrishtama datte. Sahasra gunam usrishtama datte, meaning 1,000 times. Utsrishtam. Utsrishtam means in Bengali we call it eto, in Hindi we call it jutha. Sahasra gunam utsrishtama datte. He rasam ravi, like the sun takes up moisture and it gives back as torrential rainfall, like he is utsrishta. That is how the king takes up the tax in bits and pieces and morsels, and he gives it back like a torrential downpour of rain, of betterment to the prajas. He is talking about King Dilip, the forefather of Lord Rama. So that is what we say. That is what the fundamental theory, fundamental backbone of the taxation was indicating at that point of time. Finally, the portion of remission. As I was saying, nowadays there are commercial policies, there are policies for encouragement of industries, there are whole ministries for the encouragement of industries. But could you just think, in such age, when there was presumably, I use the term presumably, there was presumably no electricity, when there was presumably no air conditioning machine, there was presumably no webinars. At that point of time, people could actually think of a commercial policy, of a double taxation agreement, of tax avoidance treaties, and there is a full chapter devoted in Arthashastra where it says how a person is to be granted loan, how a person after getting that loan can purchase a land on a subsidized rate, on such land, whether he wants to do cultivation or he wants to set up a pottery factory, on such land, whether he wants to do a pottery factory or a smithy. And if he does so, when he starts earning, for 2 years he is enjoying a tax holiday, no taxes to be payable. And after that, if he can give a good amount of return to the economy, then those 2 years tax he might not pay at all. That is remission. And if he pays it after 2 years, in modern day tax language, that is known as deferment. And if he sets up his shop where nobody else is setting up, then he gets an exemption. Section 39, Section 40, Section 41 of the Dadan Sales Tax Act. This is what it was. This is what it was in those days. So there where we stand. There is where exactly we stand. Finally, I come to the final leg of the all this lengthy blabbering. That is the Dandaniti. My friends from Symbiosis will obviously remember we had a good time while discussing Dandaniti in the class. We had good jokes to share, but not in here. And
it seems as if we are back to Symbiosis.
Thanks a lot. Actually, what happens whenever we talk of Dandaniti, then the reference of Kautilya comes up. He was the father of Dandaniti. We say Sama, Dana, Danda, Veda. What is Sama? Friendliness. Bhai kar de. Please kindly do it. Sir, kindly do it. It will be good for the society. Kindly do it. Sama. Dana. What is Dana? I coax. Okay, sir, kindly do it. I will do this for you. Danda. Okay, you are not doing it. I will impose a fine. Bheda. Today, Mr. A and Mr. B are at loggerheads. I request Mr. A. I coax Mr. A. I fine Mr. A. He's not doing. I go to Mr. B and say, look, I did all this to Mr. A. He did not do. Do you have the capacity to do this? Mr. A, B will do it. That's Bhed. And then again I go back to Mr. A. I said, look, I gave you the opportunity. You did not do. Now Mr. B is doing rangerously well. Now Mr. A also does it. This was propounded by Kautilya Chanakya. Samadana Danda Bheda. Now Dandaniti takes a huge importance in our total system. Why I say so? Kautilya's punishments were very stringent. You will see. People will actually, if you think of it, it is actually required. Any attempt to evade payment of tax, you had to pay the tax plus 400% penalty. People will not do. People will be so scared, he will simply not do. Thirdly, if we go to the other aspect, he had capital punishment against taxing offenses. People would get decapitated. What are those offenses? Adulteration in food. Babies might get killed if you adulterate the food. People might get killed. So it was an offense which actually took into consideration these loopholes, and it gave you a capital punishment. Counterfeiting of coins, counterfeiting of notes. At that point of time, there were no notes. I stand corrected. Counterfeiting of coins will take your economy to shambles. The economy will be simply wiped off. Capital punishment once again. So these were the Dandaniti portions of Kautilya as far as Kautilya is concerned. Now, another thing, this as I had already said, there was a presentation also. I ran through the whole thing. I don't know whether that presentation is at all required right now or not, because I've already run through. So, oh yeah, that was it. So, counterfeiting of coins, and this. So that basically comes to the close of the of a holistic view which we can have as far as the ancient Indian taxation is concerned. Now I will like to add a few lines. There is one untrodden territory which I dare to treat today. Everybody should be equally interested on this. That is what happened in our hilly states, in the brotherlands of Himalayas. What happened there? I will have an entire session on this because this will take a huge amount of time. But anyway, I will just touch up the issue once. In the Himalayas, in the Nepal kingdoms, in the lands of Sikkim, Bhutan, Nepal, all there, the Silk Route went through it. And in that Silk Route, people used to come in and go. They used to take that Silk Route very often. Merchants setting up camps. They had to set up camps. With them, they had merchandises which were very precious in nature. So, merchants from China, Iran, merchants from far countries, they did not carry their laborers. They hired local laborers, they hired local people to take those. Now, while crossing these Himalayan kingdoms, they used to contact the headman of the village. That headman of the village, he used to give those merchants his own men, 5, 10, 15, howsoever required. All the payments were appropriated by the headman. He did not pay his own people, but what he did, he gave them enough food and water for them and for their family. But these people who were actually taking the load up, since they did not get anything out of it, they were not very happy to do the biddings. This was known as Kalo Bato. In old Nepali, this was known as Kalo Bato. And I'm thankful to one of my senior colleagues. He had shared this story of Kalo Bato to me. And if you all are interested, I can arrange a webinar on the advent of taxation from the age of Kalo Bato. That goes back to the Genghis Khan, that goes back to the Kublai Khan regime age. So that will be it from now, from the chair. Now I can take up all your questions if you have. Let's see the chat. There are many things written in the chat, but unfortunately I have not seen any one of them. Nice presentation, very useful. Thank you, sir. Siddhartha Mukhopadhyay, thank you, Mr. Mukhopadhyay. Arun Naya, nice college classroom-like atmosphere. Well, thanks a lot. Kindly display the slides. I think the slides were displayed. Okay, now if any one of you have any question, kindly in this chat box, kindly write that. Thank you, Anshul. Kindly write that. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Kindly write that I have a question and unmute yourself and put the question through. Yes, Ms. Das. Kindly unmute your microphone. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah, as you stated that Kara and Balin both are general tax, then what is the difference between both of these?
Very well. Balim is not basically a general tax. Kindly unmute your microphone. I will come up with the answer. Balim is basically a religious tax, but Kara happens to be, I will say, Balim is a subset, Kara is a superset. Balim is a type of Kara. Kara means any sort of tax, and Balim is basically religious taxes. Not religious taxes. It's a misnomer to say a religious tax. It is something which is taken up at religious places, like the mandirs, like the religious institutions, and thereafter those are used for general public good. That is what Balim is. And Kara means Kara. Balim can be a Kara, Mukha Sangraha can be a Kara, Pindakara is a Kara, Piptra is a Kara. So that is it. Sritopa, perhaps Sritopa is having a question. Ms. Sinha?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, since you have seen the Pinkadara and Crypta, both are fixed taxes, then what is the difference between both of them?
Difference between both of them, I'll tell you. Like it depends on the it depends on the land portion where you stay. For example, Kliptra, a village, a fisherman's village. Kindly mute your microphone. A fisherman's village pays a Kliptra, whereas a Pindakara is paid by persons who are residing near a market. These are posh localities. Like these are considered to be posh localities near to a market. So your essential supplies are at home. So you can obviously come with it. Then again, if you go for the fisherman's village, you can get fish, you can get everything on that. So that's also a privileged location. So for that, you have Pindakara. Let me carry on with one very seething topic nowadays. The question is for direct tax code. Many of us had heard this direct tax code. In fact, even that direct tax code had been a proper genesis in the ancient Indian history. Even in the ancient Indian history, they had always harped for the eradication of multivarious notifications. There should be one uniform state of law. In fact, in Kautilya's Arthashastra, it has been written that a law which does not have a tax, which does not have the force of law, is not a tax. Article 265 of the Indian Constitution, which says, as Honorable Justice Mr. Pradipta Roy had already pointed out, he stated this, that under Article 265, you cannot levy a tax until and unless there is the force of law. Same thing. So in that matter of fact, for that matter of fact, you can always say that even the doctrine of ultra vires had something to do with the ancient Indian law.
Pradhan, please can you tell me?
Yes, please.
Pradhan, I have a query.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Can you tell me how can the new direct tax code can cut the income tax?
Nah, it is not. It's about replacing the income tax, because there had been agenda in the past as well that income tax has to go on its entirety. Like nowadays, we are into BTT, banking transaction tax.
Right.
Income tax is the values of yesteryears. Like I won't say that income tax is a very successful regime. I won't call it a very successful regime. But obviously, with the advent of times and with the developments, you will probably, the DTC will not see the light of day only because of the advent of this BTT, banking transaction tax. So this is something where actually direct tax code was to embolden the income tax regime. It was not against the income tax regime. It was like fitting your computer with new 61 GB RAM. I did it yesterday, so I know. So this was like that. It's not against the.
So the 5-member committee has recommended for some changes.
Yes. Because
the 5-member committee has recommended for some changes.
Yes, because
in the Income Tax Act.
Yes, because the DTC, but what BTT wants to do, BTT meaning business banking transaction tax, it wants to change the regime itself completely. It wants to change the complete regime. So there will be a new incidence whatsoever. Under the Income Tax Act and the DTC, both the point of incidence remain the same. It is your income. But in BTT, the incidence will be the bank transaction, not your income.
Right.
That we are yet to draft. So, Mr. Gupta
your
has already.
Slides had been very enlightening. Your slides had been very enlightening.
Thanks a lot.
I would be really very grateful if the slides can be shared on the WhatsApp group.
Yes, there is already a request from Mr. Sanjay Kumpawat. I will do it. I will.
It's a very new thing. It's a very new thing for us also.
Very well. I will obviously do the needful. I'm not there in the group, but I will do the needful so that all of you get the copy of the slide. I mean,
sure.
Slide. Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Piyal,
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, sir. Mr. Piyal Gupta has provided with a query. I will read the query first. First of all, thanks for enlightening us on the topic of origin of taxation in the Indian context. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. My question is whether the era will also include the Mughal. Very pertinent question. Very pertinent question. Include the Mughal regime and how was the taxation system at that point of time? Yes, yes, I have already read it. Now, Mr. Gupta, this is a very pertinent question. Although your question pertains to that period just before which I have stopped, but not Mughal regime. If I go into the history of ancient, rather India, then we have to start from 4500 BC. It ends at 1100 AD. At 1100 AD, you have Mahmud of Ghazni coming down with all thunders and mights from the somewhere from the hills of Afghanistan, and from there you have Ghazni. Thereafter you have Muhammad of Ghori. Then you have slave dynasty. Then you have Delhi Sultanate, Bengal Delhi Sultanate, Khilji dynasty. Thereafter you have the Mughals. Mughals are much later, much later. Mughals is recent past. So that's why there is a argument between the historians that whether we can call Muhammad the Ghorids, they used to call themselves Ghorids, whether we can ever call Ghorids to be proper Indians. But nobody disputes that Mughals were Indians, although Babur had different roots. Anyway, I will not go into that. But as far as Mughal period is concerned, I'm very sorry to say, Mughal period, we do not have anything enlightening in terms of taxation, excepting a few dark things which we do not want to remember, like jizya. Jizya was something which was a religious tax upon the non-Muslims. I won't say the term, I won't use the term Hindu, but I would use the term non-Muslims. Any non-Muslim had to pay jizya. So that is something, a black stained part of our history. I do not, even I don't want to acknowledge it as our history, because something which do not makes you feel proud, it's not something that worth sharing. But yes, as far as the taxation system is concerned, Akbar did a great many things which could be stated to be exactly jizya was abolished by Akbar. Absolutely, that's what I was coming to. Akbar did a great many things which could be stated to have a good impact on the commercial brethren as a whole. Like, firstly, abolition of jizya was nothing to do with taxation. It was a social reform. So I won't go into that. But what Akbar did, he standardized coins. He standardized weights and measures. In his period, we say, another contribution of the Mughals, I will say, in many Indian languages, not only in Bengali, not only in Hindi, in many Indian languages, we say, dam. Iska dam kya hai? Etar koto dam. What is the price? So, this word dam comes from the Mughal dynasty. There were coins which were used to be known as dams. 1 dam, half dam, 1.5 dam. Dams made falus. It was basically Babur who started these dams. And this dam, creation of dam, needed some standardization of weights and measures. See, if I today say you will pay tax, I have to say how much tax. I have to quantify it somewhere. So how do I express that how much? A percentage of something. A percentage of what thing? A standard weight or a standard measure. If I do not have a standard measure, I cannot do it. So that was how, and yes, there were certain other aspects, not taxation, because Mughals, the Muslim era rulers had a different ethos altogether. For example, even Sher Shah Suri, who was a celebrated general and later on climbed to the throne of Bharata, he even in his own testimonials wrote, don't give them food, pay them money, they will fight. Unfortunate. People fighting for money do not make Ayodhya. What I said Ayodhya, I just a bit before I just explained what Ayodhya is. Ayodhya is people standing for their leader, the person who is providing their square meal, the person who is actually protecting his wife and children. They are standing for him. He knows if that person falls, his wife and children is gone. But a person who is fighting for money, he is not Ayodhya. He knows, भाई अभी तो निकल लेते हैं, पहले तो आज निकल जाए, फिर उसके बाद देखेंगे भाई, अगर जान है तो जहान है, कहीं और पे जाके बल्ला लेके खड़ा हो जाएंगे. That is what it is. So these were the differences. I'm not demeaning. I do not have any intention to demean the Mughal systems. Mughal system gave, rather the Islamic system. Islamic system gave us good buildings, although destroyed a few, but it gave us a good buildings, good architecture, good cultural backdrop we had. So these were the things that we got. Mr. Gupta, are you...
According to you,
yes,
the Mughal tax system was a progressive system or a digressive system?
Absolutely regressive system. Absolutely regressive system. Why I say this? Because...
Why so?
Because, you see, Akbar had ordained a tax system, first and foremost. Akbar was the first person to ordain certain tax systems in its own framework. Akbar was succeeded by Shah Jahan. Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Jahangir, succeeded by Jahangir. What he did? He gave the full control of his empire to Noor Jahan. Even Noor Jahan had coins in her own name. And what Noor Jahan did? He said, I am not going into the nitty-gritties of taxation. I am not going into the nitty-gritties of revenue. What I am interested in, that the administration is sound. And thereafter, Shah Jahan did away with the formal tax system. He did away with the formal tax system. And he got his new tax system in place. After his rule, when the tax system was, people could understand, okay, this is the new tax, very well, now this is how we are going to pay. Aurangzeb comes, he again amends the tax system. How can you call it progressive? If you build something on it, like if we go from income tax to DTC, progressive. If we go from income tax to an arbitrary regime of tax, neither here nor there.
Absolutely right.
That's the problem. They steadfastly, they did not have a policy. Unfortunately, they did not have a fiscal policy.
In fact, the Mughals, they used to collect the taxes for providing security from the internal revolts.
Yes.
And from external aggressions.
According to R.C. Majumdar, he wrote in his book, I may be wrong because I'm not carrying the book right now, but he wrote, the bhavarth of the whole thing was this. He said, it was more than a protection money. It was more of a protection money than tax.
Right. It was like a protection money.
Yes, it was more of a protection money. But yes,
they will save you from the external aggressions.
Not external, the internal aggression from their own goons.
And the internal revolts also.
Yes, their own goons.
Right.
Yes. Mr. Bagchi probably has a question. Thank you, Mr. Narayan. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. That was an enlightening session. Yes. Mr. Bagchi.
Okay, sir. So, Mukha Sangraha is a tax on movable goods. Again, Kara is also a tax on movable goods. So, would you illustrate the difference?
Very well. Mukha Sangraha in the today's world, I can say Mukha Sangraha is excise and customs akin to even VAT and sales tax. It is on the purchase, it is on the point of manufacture, it is on the point of sale. A Mukha Sangraha, look, this is again, once again, very important aspect to consider. Today, Bengal had a big number of jute mills. Nowadays, all the jute mills are closed. Why? Because the raw material of jute came from East Bengal. It is no more with us. So the jute industry is closed due to the non-availability of the raw materials. Now, once this jute industry is closed, why? Because there is no raw materials. So obviously, you will have places where you produce, you will have places where you manufacture. You will have places where you have marketplaces, you will have places where you have people to feed that marketplaces. If you tax a person where the manufacturing is good, if you tax it on the point of purchase, you won't earn money. Where, like in Bengal, it is not a manufacturing state, it is a trading state. Here, excise collections is poor. But sales tax or VAT revenue, or nowadays GST, I won't come, it's way bigger. Why? Because it's a trading state. Here people sell and purchase. So Mukha Sangraha, when it went to Magadha, it was a VAT, sales tax, in the nature of VAT and sales tax. Again, this Mukha Sangraha, when it went to Punjab, it became, whenever the bullock carts used to leave the factory premises of a maida call, like a flour mill, that became the Mukha Sangraha there. So it became the excise at that point of time. Manufacture of maida, manufacture of white flour. Mukha Sangraha is a tax on movable goods which can be interchangeably placed from sales tax, VAT, excise. But see, I have never used the term GST because GST is something very novel. In those times as well, we did not have a composite tax on goods and service. I will say GST to be progressive, taking cue from Mr. Narayan and Mr. Gupta's question. I will say GST is progressive. Why? Because it builds up from where its predecessors left. GST replaces VAT, GST replaces excise, GST replaces customs. How? Because it combines everything. Yes, please.
GST is a progressive legislation.
Yes, absolutely. It's a progressive legislation. So do we have any further queries or questions?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Anindu. So I think it's 6:15. If we do not have any further questions, could we call it a day for the session with the permission of our Honorable Chair?
Yeah, many of you are asking for the recorded version of the session. You will get it. You will definitely get it in the WhatsApp group.
So, with everybody's kind permission, should I close the session for today?
Yeah, sure.
Very well.
Thank you very
much. Thank you, Mr. Sengupta. Thank you, Mr.
It had been a very enlightening session. A very enlightening session.
Thank you, Mr. Narayan. Thanks a lot. Fortem Education, thanks a lot. Shorodipto Shaha, thank you. Sampriti Shaha, thank you. Over to I would
like to convey my regards to my Lord's Justice Pradipta Rai. I am extremely grateful to hear my Lord's Justice Pradipta Rai. A very enlightening session.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you, Rakesh.
Thank you, sir.
Sangeeta. Thank you, Devashree.
Lastly, on behalf of our firm, I thank Honorable Justice Pradipta Rai for kindly accepting our invitation and extending his support to our venture. Without his support, it would not have been possible for us to arrange this webinar. I thank all our respected participants for attending this webinar and making it a great success. I also thank our associates who rendered a great support to all of us. Above all, today evening, we have had the support of our amazingly erudite audience, without whose cooperation and participation, it would have been impossible for us to have such enlightening session. All we have, as we had earlier declared, that all the participants of this webinar will receive their respective certificates by 15th of August 2020, the Independence Day. So finally, thank you all once again. We now call a close of this.
Just a moment before we close, I will like to thank you personally. We had a August session here, and I would especially name a few of my associates without whose support I couldn't have, or rather the team couldn't have arranged this seminar. First and foremost, I would take the name of Ms. Sritapa Sinha. She has done a commendable and a great job.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Although she's, and the second person, but obviously not in that necessary order, is my beloved wife, although she's my wife, but well, she has done a great job.
No, actually, I tell you something, after 8 years of marriage, you're not supposed to appreciate your wife.
And sir, for coming, the Honorable Justice Rai, he has very graciously presented himself and graced this occasion, and all my friends, all my acquaintances, colleagues, all of you who have attended this seminar today. I have many people, including some of my very beloved clients, with whom I do not share only the relationship of a client, but also as a friend, just like Mr. Nair, just like Mr. Kumpawat. And my friends from Mr. Sharma, I can see, I'm very elated to see you, Mr. Yadev Sharma. Dilip, Bindu, Rakesh, I'm very actually honored. Ms. Devashree Bhattacharya, thanks a lot for your support. Shoroditya, thank you. Anindita, thank you. Everybody, thanks a lot for all your supports. Without you, it wouldn't have been done. Thanks. So we formally close this session. Jai Hind.